Ladies and gentlemen, we live in a world that teaches women how to be wanted, but rarely how to be whole. From a young age, she's told to smile more, speak less, and shape herself into someone worthy of love and approval. But today, I invite you to consider a radical shift. What if true desirability has nothing to do with performance and everything to do with presence? What if the woman everyone truly wants is not the one who tries to fit in, but the one who dares to come home to herself? From the very beginning of life, a woman is shaped, first by family, then by society, and finally by the subconscious agreements she makes to survive in a world that often values image over substance. She is taught to smile even when she wants to cry. She is taught to comply when her soul wants to rebel. Slowly, piece by piece, she constructs a version of herself that can be accepted, validated, praised. This constructed self is what psychology has called the persona, the social mask that helps her move through the world without threat, without rejection, without too much discomfort. The persona is not inherently false, it is simply partial. It is not a lie, but it is not the whole truth either. It serves a function, but it is not who she is. The deeper part of her, the part that does not shift with circumstance or approval, is what can be called her essence. This essence is not loud or flashy. It does not cry out for attention. It is the still, quiet center from which her real voice emerges. It is the part of her that existed before the world began naming her, shaping her, and assigning value based on roles. To return to this essence is not merely a psychological task, it is a spiritual return. A woman who begins this inward journey often feels as if parts of her are dying, and in a way, they are. The image of herself she worked so hard to perfect begins to dissolve. The applause that once felt nourishing begins to ring hollow. The need to be seen in a certain way becomes less important than the need to see herself clearly. But this journey back to essence is not one of adding, it is one of shedding. She peels away the beliefs that were never hers. She takes off the masks she no longer needs. She unlearns the patterns that kept her small. This is not a performance. It is not a strategy for success. It is a return to her truest frequency. The world may not always reward her for it immediately. In fact, many will be confused or even resistant. They will ask her why she is changing, why she no longer laughs at what she used to, why she no longer plays the game. Some will walk away, but others, those who have begun their own return, will recognize her instantly. They will feel the energy of someone who no longer lives for external validation, but from internal alignment. This kind of woman does not need to announce herself. Her presence speaks louder than words. She does not need to manipulate or chase. Her authenticity does the attracting. It is not about being agreeable, impressive, or easy to digest. It is about being real, and the paradox is that in a world drowning in performance, reality is magnetic. Essence draws in those who are ready for depth, truth, and something lasting. It is not reactive. It does not try to prove. It simply exists with quiet authority. She begins to make decisions not from fear, but from clarity. She stops seeking love by shrinking herself. She stops earning approval by betraying herself. She stops negotiating her identity in exchange for being liked. There is an unmistakable calm in a woman who knows who she is beneath the noise. She no longer over-explains. She no longer decorates herself for acceptance. She is not trying to convince anyone, because she no longer doubts herself. This doesn't mean she is always certain, always powerful, always collected. It means she trusts the process of returning to herself over and over without shame. She is soft where she wants to be and fierce where she needs to be. Her power does not derive from dominance, but from integration. To be in essence is to be undivided. It is to know that no external praise can outweigh internal peace. It is to feel that your worth is no longer up for negotiation. A woman who lives from this place becomes unmistakably radiant, not because she tries to be, but because there is nothing blocking her light. The performance has ended, the audience has dispersed, and what remains is real, and in that reality she finds her wholeness. In that wholeness others find her, not the version of her that was carefully curated, but the version of her that was always waiting beneath the mask. the woman who is no longer just seen, but felt. Most people move through life reacting, pushed and pulled by their emotions, rarely stopping to ask where those emotions come from or what they might be trying to teach. A woman who begins to evolve internally does not seek to suppress her emotional life, nor does she allow it to rule her blindly. Instead, she starts to relate to her emotions as living forces within her psyche, forces that carry messages, meanings, and opportunities for transformation. She understands that every emotion, even the most uncomfortable ones, holds the potential for awareness. She no longer labels them as good or bad, acceptable or shameful. Anger, sadness, fear, longing, none of these are threats. They are invitations. They are fragments of herself that surface when something within is ready to be seen and integrated. She begins to notice her triggers without letting them dictate her behavior. Rather than collapse into every wave of emotion or numb herself to avoid them, she creates space between the feeling and the response. In that space, something miraculous happens. She doesn't deny the emotion, but she doesn't drown in it either. She witnesses it, observes its rise, listens to what it points to. This space between reaction and reflection is where transformation begins. It's where emotion is no longer just energy in motion. It becomes wisdom. What once made her spiral now becomes material for deeper self-understanding. She begins to ask not just, why do I feel this? But where does this originate? What does this feeling want me to know about myself? She notices that her emotional landscape is not random, but patterned. Perhaps her anger arises not from the present moment, but from a wound long buried, a moment in childhood when her voice was silenced, or her boundaries were ignored. Now, in adulthood, that wound reactivates not to harm her, but to offer her the chance to choose differently. To choose her voice, to choose protection, to choose self-respect. And when she chooses consciously, the pattern breaks. The emotion has served its purpose, and in that it begins to dissolve. This is emotional alchemy, not the avoidance of pain, but its transformation. The raw, untamed emotion becomes a refined insight. The chaos becomes coherence. She learns to sit with discomfort without immediately reaching for distraction. The phone, the food, the conversation, the approval, these no longer hold the same grip, because she is no longer afraid of what she feels. She trusts her capacity to hold her emotional world with strength and softness. She doesn't need to explode in order to be heard, nor does she need to suppress in order to be accepted. She finds the sacred middle, the integrated place where she can express clearly and calmly, without apology. When she speaks from this place, people listen, not because she's louder, but because she's rooted. Her words don't carry desperation, they carry clarity. She has made peace with her feelings, and in doing so, she becomes unshakable. There's a difference between emotional fragility and emotional depth. One breaks under pressure, the other deepens. The woman who has mastered emotional alchemy is not unfeeling. She feels everything, but she is not owned by those feelings. They move through her, not as floods, but as currents of insight. She lets joy expand her. She lets grief purify her. She lets anger set boundaries and love soften her defenses. Every feeling has a place. None are banished, none are dramatized, all are honored and given room to breathe. This inner relationship with emotion changes everything. She no longer seeks to be rescued from what she feels. She doesn't demand that others manage her emotions for her. She becomes her own container. She knows how to hold herself in the storm, and when others witness this, they don't just see strength. They feel safe in her presence. Emotional safety is not created by perfection. It's created by presence. By showing up for yourself first, completely, you create a field of calm around you that others can feel but not always explain. This is a different kind of power, not the power that dominates, but the power that grounds. The woman who makes this shift no longer needs to justify or explain every emotional reaction. She doesn't need to prove that her feelings are valid. She knows they are, and so she responds instead of reacts. She pauses instead of attacks. She listens instead of escapes. She doesn't abandon herself when emotion rises. She stays, she remains, and in doing so, she becomes emotionally sovereign. Nothing outside of her determines her inner state. She chooses how to move with her feelings, and that choice, made again and again, becomes her freedom. To reach the place where a woman no longer seeks her reflection in the eyes of another is to cross an invisible threshold, one that separates longing from sovereignty. Many women spend years, even lifetimes, trying to be chosen. Whether by a partner, a group, a mentor, or even a parent, the hidden question lingers in their psyche: am I enough for you to stay? This desire to be validated, affirmed, selected. It runs deep, often formed in childhood, where love might have been conditional, attention might have been inconsistent, and self-worth became a currency exchanged for approval. When this happens, a woman learns to chase what already belongs to her. She starts to search outside for what was always meant to be built from within. In the early stages of growth, love feels like a rescue mission. She imagines someone arriving to finally make her feel whole, to complete the story, to end the inner tension between who she is and who she thinks she should be. But as she matures, spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, she begins to question that very narrative. She realizes that no person, no relationship, no external source can complete her. The fantasy of being saved begins to fade, and in its place a deeper truth begins to stir. She does not need to be rescued because she is not lost. She is simply returning to herself. This return is not loud or dramatic. It is subtle, steady, and sacred. It happens in quiet moments, when she chooses solitude over seeking, when she sets a boundary instead of pleasing, when she hears the voice of her inner knowing and listens. She no longer asks, "Will they choose me?" She begins to ask, "Do I choose myself even when no one else does?" This question becomes her compass. And with each small act of self-loyalty, she begins to rewrite the contract she once made with the world, the one that said her value was dependent on how much she was needed, wanted, or loved by others. In sovereignty, her decisions are no longer fear-driven. She does not say yes out of obligation or guilt. She does not perform in order to belong. She does not shrink to be more digestible. Instead, she allows herself to take up space, not aggressively, but unapologetically. There is no arrogance here, only clarity. She knows what she will allow and what she will not. She knows what she needs and is no longer ashamed to claim it. She is not a puzzle missing pieces. She is not a draft needing edits. She is complete, not because she is flawless, but because she belongs fully to herself. This inner shift creates an outer ripple. The way she moves changes. She no longer grasps. She no longer begs. She no longer bargains with her dignity. Love becomes a mirror, not a mask. Connection becomes a resonance, not an escape. She is no longer afraid to be alone, because she is not lonely in her own presence. Her aloneness is not a void, but a temple. In that space, she meets herself again and again, and each meeting brings her closer to the truth. She is not here to be chosen like an object on a shelf. She is here to live fully, to love deeply, to walk awake in a world that constantly asks her to sleep. The woman who embodies sovereignty does not harden. She does not close. She softens from strength. She loves from wholeness. She listens without losing herself. She can give, not to be loved in return, but because love flows through her naturally, endlessly, effortlessly. But that love no longer comes at the cost of self-abandonment. She will not trade her peace for attachment. She will not sacrifice her voice to be accepted. She will not stay where she cannot be fully seen. And in this refusal, there is no bitterness. There is simply knowing. Others feel this shift even if they cannot name it. There is something different about a woman who does not need to be needed. Something magnetic about a woman who has nothing to prove. Something sacred about a woman who has stopped chasing and started choosing. Her energy is not frantic, it is grounded. Her presence is not about performance, it is about essence. She does not demand respect. She commands it simply by being, because the woman who has returned to herself can never be taken from herself again. There comes a point in every woman's journey where she can no longer pretend that wholeness means perfection. She begins to see that trying to be only one version of herself, only good, only gentle, only composed, creates a fracture within. Something inside her starts to stir and reject the pressure to be singular. She begins to feel the weight of all the versions of herself that she had to hide in order to be accepted. The wild one, the rebellious one, the angry one, the deeply intuitive one. These parts never died. They were simply buried, shamed, silenced. But as she evolves, she no longer sees these inner aspects as threats to her identity. She begins to understand they are essential. They were never mistakes. They were missing pieces, and integration becomes not just a desire, but a necessity. She recognizes that within her exists not one self, but many. There is the part of her that wants to love, to nurture, to hold. There is also the part that wants to roar, to walk away, to disrupt. There is the part of her that craves solitude and silence. And then, the part that aches for connection and closeness. There is wisdom in her joy, and there is wisdom in her rage. None of it is wrong. All of it is her. The more she tries to cut herself in half to fit into neat categories, the more fragmented she becomes. It is only when she stops resisting the complexity of her nature that she begins to feel whole again. This is not an easy path. Integration requires the willingness to face parts of herself she's been taught to reject. She must look her shadow in the eye, not to defeat it, but to understand it. The shadow is not evil. It is simply the place where her rejected truths live. Every time she said yes when she meant no, a shadow was born. Every time she smiled to make others comfortable while her heart was breaking, another shadow took shape. Every time she quieted her intuition for the sake of being polite or pleasing, she buried a part of her power. To integrate is to reclaim these lost fragments. It is not about becoming something new. It is about remembering who she was before the world told her who to be. She learns to sit with discomfort. She stops labeling her emotions or instincts as bad or inappropriate. When envy arises, she doesn't shame it. She asks what unmet desire it is pointing toward. When anger flares, she doesn't fear it. She listens to the boundary it is protecting. When sadness surfaces, she no longer rushes to fix it. She holds it like a wise teacher. In this way, her inner world stops being a battlefield. It becomes a landscape she knows how to walk through with grace. She becomes fluent in the language of her own psyche. This integration is not passive. It is a conscious act of weaving together what was once divided. It is a daily practice of allowing herself to be human, not ideal. It is choosing truth over performance, depth over image, self-loyalty over people-pleasing, and something incredible happens when she does this. The energy she once used to suppress, perform, or hide is now freed. She becomes magnetic not because she is flawless, but because she is real. Others can sense it. They feel safer around her, not because she says all the right things, but because she embodies wholeness. There is no hidden agenda, no false sweetness, no silent resentment. She is exactly who she appears to be. She carries light, but not at the expense of her shadow. She carries softness, but not at the cost of her strength. The more she integrates, the less she fears being misunderstood. She doesn't need to explain every part of herself to be at peace with it. She knows that not everyone will understand her path, and she doesn't need them to. Her validation no longer comes from external agreement. It comes from inner coherence. When she is alone, she does not feel fragmented. She feels gathered. She knows where she stands within herself. She is no longer chasing completeness in relationships, achievements, or appearances. She is no longer reaching outside for what can only be found within. She is no longer pretending to be a polished version of herself to earn love. She is the woman who has met all sides of herself and welcomed them home. In doing so, she becomes not just whole, but unshakably alive. There comes a moment when striving loses its shine. A woman who has been running for years, toward approval, toward achievement, toward some image of success, finds herself suddenly tired. not physically but spiritually. It is the kind of tired that no sleep can fix, because it is born from a life lived outside of herself. She begins to realize that everything she was chasing was built on someone else's measure of enough. The praise she collected, the roles she mastered, the sacrifices she made, all of it was constructed to be seen, and yet the one person who was never truly watching, never fully acknowledged in the process, was herself. This awakening doesn't come as a loud crash. It often arrives quietly, in the moments when the applause fades, the room empties, and she is left alone with the echo of her own soul. She starts to hear the faint whispers of a deeper voice within, one that does not ask her to prove herself or be perfect, but simply to be present. This is the beginning of the shift from external striving to inner reflection. She notices how much of her energy has been consumed by the pursuit of things she thought would finally make her feel safe, loved, or worthy. She sees how often she looked outward to validate what should have been her own inner truth. She begins to ask different questions, questions that don't have flashy answers. Not what more can I do, but why do I need to do so much? Not how do I get there, but who am I beneath the need to get anywhere? This internal shift is subtle but profound. She starts to slow down, not because she is giving up, but because she is waking up. No longer hypnotized by constant doing, she starts to feel again, feel her breath, feel the quiet hunger of her spirit, feel the places where her truth has been buried beneath years of performance. She notices that so much of her identity had been built around the reactions of others. She was praised for her productivity, so she became tireless. She was admired for her resilience, so she became unbreakable. She was rewarded for being agreeable, so she silenced her truth. But now she sees those things not as achievements, but as evidence of how far she had drifted from herself. Reflection invites her to return, not to a former version of herself, but to the one she abandoned in the pursuit of becoming who the world said she should be. This return is not dramatic. It's found in ordinary, honest moments. The way she takes a breath before answering a question, the way she lets herself feel disappointed without rushing to fix it, the way she questions whether her ambition is rooted in love or fear. With each reflection, she gathers herself back. Piece by piece, she reclaims her attention, her intuition, her sense of what truly matters. She begins to act from alignment instead of obligation. She no longer says yes when her body says no. She no longer performs joy when her heart is heavy. She doesn't chase goals that leave her empty once reached. She still desires growth, but the nature of that growth has changed. It's no longer about rising in the eyes of others. It's about sinking deeper into herself. Her ambition is not erased, it is redefined. It is no longer driven by scarcity, but by authenticity. It is not frantic, but focused. She wants to build, create, contribute, but not at the cost of her own presence. As she reflects more, she judges less, especially herself. She sees how often she was her own harshest critic, how she carried expectations that didn't belong to her. She doesn't need to be everything to everyone anymore. She just needs to be whole with herself, and wholeness doesn't require more effort. It requires more honesty. She allows herself to rest without guilt, to create without performance, to simply be without explaining why. And in this space she discovers something she had been longing for all along: peace. Peace not as an escape, but as a natural result of coming home to herself. She is no longer fueled by the need to be seen, but by the need to see clearly. Every external pursuit is now filtered through an internal truth. Does this nourish me, or does it deplete me? Is this coming from fear, or from alignment? Is this really mine, or did I pick it up while trying to earn love? These questions do not stall her. They liberate her. They bring her back to a center that is quiet but unmistakably powerful. And from that center, everything begins to shift. Not because she is striving harder, but because she is aligned, awake, and rooted in her own presence. There is a kind of power that does not come from how much you say, how fast you move, or how much you know. It is not built through noise or force or constant motion. It is something deeper, something felt, something that cannot be manufactured. It is presence, And the woman who carries presence does not need to announce herself, because the energy she carries does all the speaking. She is not trying to impress or dominate. She is simply fully in herself, fully in the moment, fully aware. And in a world full of distractions and disconnection, that kind of presence becomes magnetic. Presence is not performance. It is not the result of perfectly rehearsed lines or curated behaviors. It is born from inner stillness, from knowing who you are without needing constant reassurance. It's not about taking up space through volume or confidence. It's about the quality of your attention, the depth of your listening, and the calm that follows you into every room you enter. When a woman becomes present, people don't just hear her, they feel her. She could say nothing and still shift the energy of a space, not because she's trying to, but because her awareness creates a field around her, a subtle but powerful clarity that others respond to, even if they can't explain why. A woman who has cultivated presence has done something rare. She has made peace with silence. She does not rush to fill every gap with words. She allows space. She breathes. She does not look away from discomfort. She meets it with steady eyes. She does not scan for approval in the room. She roots herself so deeply in her own being that validation becomes unnecessary. She sees clearly, listens fully, and moves with intentionality. She is not here to compete or convince. She is here to connect, to witness, and to embody what is real. This kind of presence cannot be faked. It comes only when a woman has turned inward enough times to know herself beyond the surface. She is aware of her thoughts but not ruled by them. She is in tune with her emotions but not consumed by them. She knows how to anchor herself when the world becomes chaotic. She is not swayed by every opinion, not thrown off course by every challenge. There is a steadiness to her, not because life is always easy, but because she has learned how to remain centered in the storm. Presence is the result of deep inner work, of facing her shadows, honoring her truth, and letting go of the masks she once wore to survive. The woman who is present is not addicted to multitasking. She gives her full attention to whatever is before her, a conversation, a task, a moment of rest. Her energy is not scattered, it is gathered. Focused, when she looks at you, she truly sees you. When she speaks, it's not from a place of reaction but from response. And even in disagreement, her presence brings respect. She doesn't try to win, she tries to understand. Her calm is not passivity, it is power held in reserve, directed with intention. Her words carry weight not because they are loud, but because they come from a place of alignment. Presence allows her to hear her own intuition clearly. She does not need to ask a dozen people for their opinions before making a choice. She trusts herself, and when doubt does arise, she meets it not with panic, but with curiosity. She slows down enough to ask what it's trying to teach her. She knows the difference between rushing and responding, between reacting and choosing, and so her life begins to reflect that same energy. Her relationships deepen, her boundaries strengthen, her work becomes infused with clarity and purpose. In presence, she becomes more than someone who shows up physically. She becomes someone who is fully alive, fully aware, fully awake. Her power is not about control, it's about connection, connection to herself, to others, to the moment. This is not the kind of power that burns out. It doesn't need to be constantly maintained or defended. It simply is, and it grows stronger the more she returns to it, the more she honors her own rhythm, the more she chooses alignment over approval, stillness over noise, and depth over display. She no longer has to try to be unforgettable. She simply is, not because she is flawless or always composed, but because she is fully there, and in a world that is always somewhere else, her presence becomes a revolution. There is a moment in a woman's life when she begins to understand that love is not a cure. It is not the medicine for all wounds, nor the answer to every ache. For much of her earlier life, love may have seemed like a solution, something to fix the emptiness, to end the waiting, to bring a sense of completeness that always felt just out of reach. She might have looked for it with hopeful eyes and an open heart, believing that if she just found the right person, All the scattered pieces inside her would finally fall into place. She thought the ache she felt could be soothed in someone else's arms. But eventually, and often painfully, she learns that this ache is not a sign of missing love from the outside. It is a calling to return to herself. When love is sought as a cure, it becomes a transaction. It becomes a reaching, a chasing, a bargaining for approval. It becomes a silent contract. I will give you all of me if you promise to never leave, never abandon, never make me feel the emptiness again. And in that contract, love turns into dependence. The woman begins to shape herself around the needs and desires of the other. She adjusts her tone, softens her truth, shrinks her boundaries, all in an effort to hold onto something that was never meant to save her. The danger in using love as a cure is that it places the burden of healing on someone else's presence. It says, I am only okay if you stay, but love was never meant to carry that weight. The kind of love that brings lasting peace is not the love that erases your wounds. It's the love that meets you after you've faced them. The woman who has learned this truth knows that love is not something she needs to be rescued by. It is something she is free to choose. And that choice only becomes available when she has already chosen herself first. When she no longer uses love to plug the holes in her soul, she becomes capable of loving without losing. She no longer confuses connection with completion. She understands that love is meant to enhance, not to rescue. This shift is internal. It's quiet and powerful. She stops waiting for love to fix her. She begins to look at her own reflection and offer it compassion. She stops performing for affection and starts speaking honestly. She no longer needs the other person to stay in order for her to feel whole, because wholeness has become something she tends to on her own. Love, then, becomes a beautiful addition to her life, not the foundation of her identity. It is something she chooses from clarity, not desperation. She learns that real love doesn't ask her to abandon herself. It doesn't ask her to diminish her truth or compromise her core values. It doesn't require her to be smaller, quieter, easier. Real love meets her where she is and walks alongside her, not in front of her or above her. It sees her clearly and still stays, not because she is flawless, but because she is real, and she knows that she must offer the same in return. She is not looking for perfection in the other, either. She is looking for resonance, for honesty, for depth. And because she is no longer dependent on love, she can give it more freely, not to earn something, not to fill a void, but simply because love is something she now holds within. She is no longer afraid to walk away from what does not serve her. She does not cling to relationships that drain her just to avoid loneliness. She would rather be alone in truth than together in illusion. Her solitude has become sacred. It is no longer something to escape from, but a place where she meets herself most deeply. And because of that, any love she welcomes into her life is invited, not needed. It is chosen, not grasped. She does not fall in love hoping to be healed. She rises in love already whole. When love is a choice and not a cure, it becomes expansive, it breathes, it allows room for both people to grow, to shift, to be human. It is rooted in mutual respect, not in fear, and even if it ends, she does not collapse. She grieves, she feels, but she does not lose herself, because she never gave herself away in the first place. She knows now that love is not the destination. It is the echo of a deeper relationship she has already built with herself, and that kind of love, grounded, conscious, freely chosen, is the kind of love that lasts because it was never asked to save her. It was simply welcome to walk beside her. There is a common misconception that desirability is something a woman earns through appearance, performance, or perfection. From an early age, she is taught that her worth lives in how attractive she can be to others, how well she can present herself, how appealing her voice is, how effortlessly she can be liked, how agreeable and pleasing she becomes. She may spend years shaping herself into what she thinks will make her most wanted, admired, or chosen. But the older she gets and the more aware she becomes, the more she starts to sense that something is missing in this equation. No matter how beautiful or polished or externally validated she becomes, she still feels a subtle emptiness, a gap between who she is and who she's pretending to be. The attention she receives feels fleeting. The admiration feels hollow, and somewhere in that emptiness a deeper realization begins to emerge, that true desirability does not come from how well she performs or pleases. It comes from how whole she is within herself. Wholeness is not about flawlessness. It's not about being finished, complete, or perfectly healed. It is about integration, the inner unity of all the parts of her that she once denied, suppressed, or compartmentalized in the hope of being more acceptable. A whole woman is not one who has avoided pain, but one who has faced it and stayed with herself through it. She has looked at her shame, her fear, her rage, her longing, not to fix them, but to understand them. She knows where her wounds are, but she doesn't lead with them. She doesn't ask others to patch her together. She is already in the process of doing that for herself. What makes her desirable is not her image, but her energy. People may not be able to describe it with words, but they feel it immediately when they encounter her. She carries something rare in internal coherence. She does not send mixed signals. She is not chasing or grasping or trying to convince you of her worth. She knows it deeply, even when she doubts it on the surface. She's moved beyond needing to be the most liked, the most noticed, the most desired in the room. She is at peace not being everyone's cup of tea because she has finally become her own. She doesn't need to be chosen to feel valuable. She already chose herself, and that energy cannot be faked. In a world where many people seek connection to fill their own gaps, the woman who is whole becomes magnetic. She offers presence, not pressure. She listens without trying to manipulate. She speaks without trying to impress. She shows up without needing to be rewarded. She doesn't abandon herself to keep someone else close. She doesn't lose herself in love because she has no interest in disappearing. She loves from a place of fullness, not from emptiness. She gives not because she's afraid to lose, but because she has enough to share. Her boundaries are firm not because she is guarded, but because she is clear. She does not fear rejection because she does not rely on others to reflect her value back to her. When someone cannot meet her in depth or truth, she does not take it personally. She understands that not all connections are meant to last, and not all attention is worth receiving. This discernment gives her a quiet confidence that becomes more compelling than any curated charm. People feel safe around her, not because she has no shadows, but because she owns them. She is not trying to be light all the time. She is simply real, and that realness is what others are drawn to, even if they can't articulate why. She becomes a mirror to those around her. In her presence, people either rise or retreat. She is a catalyst, not because she demands change, but because she embodies it. Her wholeness challenges the illusions others are still clinging to. And yet, she has no desire to fix or rescue. She respects other people's timing because she has learned to respect her own. Her life is no longer a performance. It is a practice of showing up truthfully, of honoring her own needs, of living in alignment with her values and intuition. She doesn't wear her wholeness as a badge, and she doesn't use it to make others feel small. It is simply who she is now, quietly powerful, grounded, desirable not because she tries to be, but because she is.